Check, check. Intent.
Check, check.
Test. Oh, hey, we're working. Yeah, well, Jed is here from the Infinex team. He's just signing in, so he'll be like 30 seconds. But how are we all doing? Are we all enjoying the event so far? Nice, cheery response, classic from the crypto events. Yeah, so let's get started. If we all want to do a quick round of introductions, there's a lot of panelists. The reason for this is because we've got different layers of the stack, which should make it interesting. Hopefully not too technical for people like myself in particular. So yeah, why don't we get started?
Hey, I'm Dave. I work on Osmosis and Polaris. Polaris is trying to make one UI to let you trade any asset in crypto and come in with any existing wallet. And if you don't have a wallet for something, just make one on your behalf via MPC.
Nice.
First, my name is Alexander. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Catalyst. We're building Crosscats, which is a cross-chain swap system that is targeting LVMs so that you can get from Ethereum to all of the other LVMs and from all of the LVMs to Ethereum. Specifically, we're also targeting to build applications so that these applications can integrate and onboard users from various ecosystems without any obstacles to the integration.
Hey, I'm Matt. I work on Across. And Across is basically a cross-chain bridge. You can use it directly via front end. You can also, if you're a developer, you can build this into your application so that you can basically onboard users from anywhere.
Sweet. Hey guys, I'm Vaibhav. I also go by VC. One of the founders at Socket. Socket's a chain abstraction protocol. We allow developers to build chain abstracted applications. We are building one of the applications on top called Bungee, which allows people to like swap assets, and that's pretty much it. They don't need to care where the asset is. They just swap. Could be on-chain, could be on Binance. It just works.
Hey everyone, I'm Jed. I'm building Infinex, which is an app that is designed to replicate a lot of the functionality of Binance, but on-chain. So chain abstraction is close to our heart. Our founder, Kane, often says that Binance is actually one of the best chain abstraction technologies the world has ever seen. Our goal is to make that real.
Hey everyone, I'm Pete. I'm one of the co-founders of DSX. So we are a on-chain SEX built on top of the OneBalance stack. So what we're trying to do is basically bring together spot, yield, perps in the most easy way for users, but allow users to basically access all the craziness on chain. We launched this morning, so everyone check it out. It's dsx.app.
Nice. So let's kickstart with the first question. There are many different interpretations of what a chain abstracted app entails, with many different components of the stack being included. In your opinion, what defines a chain abstracted app, and what components of the stack should be included in this definition?
For me, I think the chain abstraction app's definition is kind of simple. As a user, you don't care what chain you're on. Maybe a hot take to Adrian if he's here. And so you should just be able to access funds from whatever access method you have, whatever key material you have, and do whatever you want. Sign in with Google, use an existing wallet, whatever. We just focus on the user experience, and you just remove the need of caring which chain they're from.
I think from a developer experience, you shouldn't care where the assets are, which is very much agreeing with what you just said. But this also means that it should be easy and the tools available to actually get your assets where they need to be so that you can get users from all the other chains and ecosystems that you want to access. This also pertains to liquidity and accessing that liquidity and locking it away or using it for what you need to do. You also need to be able to execute it in a single transaction so the user is not bothered by there being friction between these various chains.
Yeah, I'll just add one small thing. I totally agree with all that. I think that the users, even today, they think in terms of apps. They don't really, I think in the Web 2 world, users think about what application they're using, and I think that this just adds a lot of complexity to have layers of abstraction, like, oh, you need to know what chain you're on, you also need to know what app you're using, so you have this sort of combinatorial combination of Aave plus which chain you're on, and I think to onboard many more users into our ecosystem, we have to think about things in terms of like simplifying that stack so that users are only aware of what applications they're using. And I think from a trust model, we also have to try to collapse that trust model into just what application you're using, which I think is sort of where we're getting to as you see like more like sort of applications and roll-ups becoming the same thing. Every app has its own roll-up, and so you end up in a world where users, the trust model is the app, and that's also the chain where the user has their funds.
Yeah, highly resonate with that one. I think for me, it's exactly that, like bringing like app centricity to the space, using chains as servers more and more, right? I think what the stack looks like is TBD, honestly. We don't know how things are going to split up, but the idea is like you should care about the action you're trying to do, not where it's getting executed. And I think like all the chat about like, you know, assets and like UX issues are sort of like a boiled down version of this like larger vision where you use chains as servers more and more.
Yeah, I think to build on all of that, the idea that users should know about chains at all in most use cases seems like a false thing. Like if I'm trying to use Google and I've got to pick my data center first, that's probably not the right place to start. Also, how do I pick one? So definitely like, or what database it's using behind the scenes, like, and how to interpret queries to safely know that they're okay to be run. If we can hide as much of that as possible behind like actually capturing the user intent as opposed to the way that that's going to be executed. So I think the stack goes all the way from sort of user interaction design down as low as it needs to. Eventually there are different chains with different properties, and the differences between those are important. So at some point that changes, but I guess we'll find out exactly where the right point is.
I think the way we look at it right now is that anyone building in the space for a long time knows there's a huge amount of friction that we just sort of overcome as builders or users of DeFi, right? People coming into Web3 or DeFi don't want those or don't need to know what chain they're on. The one thing we're building right now is looking at how we can sort of take BTC yield-bearing assets and make it very, very simple for users. But any sort of like friction point you have in terms of onboarding, swapping, executing, all that, it's just one other barrier of entry. Like anyone who's been, you know, not on a different chain, missed 100x, is probably because you don't know the bridge, you don't know how to get there. And we want to remove all of that, so it's just, again, very, very simple for users to simply find something they want to buy, find something they want to do on chain, and get there as fast as possible.
Does account abstraction now fall under the chain abstraction umbrella?
For me, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's all part of the same solve, right? Like abstraction is about making the underlying technology less directly relevant to the users and putting the action they're trying to perform in front of them instead. Like that's really, if you zoom out, that's what we're abstracting. Chain abstraction is one part, account abstraction is another one. And to some extent, like what you're signing and how that might translate through an intense layer to what's actually being executed is also part of that. I think transaction abstraction will become something we talk more about as well.
Oh, yeah, part of the issue I've had with account abstraction for years is that the way it's been approached is like you have an account abstraction teams that like are independent startups that try to make some framework, but that's never gonna get adoption. You have 10 competing frameworks. Like the way you get any of the user-facing property you want is app first, and then make standards to like get sharing across apps. And so, yeah, I also think that people who are focused on UX first are going to be solving the same account abstraction problems, but directly in their app layer, and then we'll get the cross-app like cohesion over time.
Nice. So this question focused towards the actual applications first, but chain abstraction and chain abstracted apps have become a necessity in the current climate, with obviously hundreds of different chains being deployed, millions of dollars in liquidity being fragmented and siloed in different ecosystems. There's an argument that if chain abstraction is successful, the number of chains will actually decrease as liquidity will start to conglomerate within just a few chains, and there won't actually be a need for so many L2s. Do you agree with this paradox?
I don't think so. I don't think it'll decrease. I think it depends on, let's say, ETH L2s, for example. A lot of people think there's going to be consolidation, like one winner, maybe yes, maybe no. But you see with like non-EVM ecosystems, there's a definite need. There's chain properties and also chain assets as well. They're specific to those chains. So I don't think you see a massive consolidation. If anything, we probably see more centralization on like major execution in terms of if you're going from ETH to USDC, where you get the best execution. Maybe that's not a DEX, that's probably an off-chain fill. So I think there's going to be more centralization around those parameters, but maybe less currently than chains themselves.
Yeah, I think it's actually the wrong question. Both seem inevitable to me, like that we end up with more chains and different networks that have different properties, because like if you look at the web more broadly in a historic sense, and like we have all these different database platforms, and we've also had a lot of them. Some come and burn out, within a few years. Others have been around since, forever in web terms, and they're all useful because we have all of these different use cases, and technology sort of specializes, and you'll get highly specialized databases for a particular use case, and then you get more generalized ones that also end up kind of encompassing functionality from the specializations, like Postgres is an example where you can now basically have a document store running in that. And I think the same thing will happen with blockchains. We'll get highly specialized chains, they'll come, they'll go, and then we'll also get sort of the more generic chains that will embrace technology over time. And I think that will more be where we see the consolidation come from as the space matures. But on the other hand, we're building apps, and users don't care what databases we're using or blockchains, right? So I think we inevitably will need chain abstraction just becomes the way we get there as opposed to the thing that we're doing.
Yeah, I think highly resonate, right? I think the idea is because we did not have abstraction so far, we were actually quite limited to the amount of chains we could launch. And now we could do a lot more. And these chains will differ in terms of functionality that they offer. For example, Celestia offering DA and not execution, unlike Ethereum and a bunch of other L1s. So differing in functionality, as well as differing in what part of the life cycle they exist on. For example, I'm seeing an increasing pattern of there being something I would like to call a gateway rollup versus an execution rollup. A gateway rollup is where people sort of lock their funds, where people hold their funds and use that rollup to interact with other applications across all rollups. So in a single on-chain interaction, you might be interacting with 5 different rollups. And all 5 of these rollups are sort of adding some sort of different value add.
Could you give us an example of a gateway rollup?
Zerion just launched yesterday. So Zerion is a wallet. You hold funds there, and you interact with other applications powered by Socket, Slide Chill, across all chains. Kinto, another safety-first rollup, which sort of specializes in being ultra secure to the point where every EOA has to do a KYC, but that is their user segment. So users KYC, hold funds on Kinto, interact with all applications across all chains via them, right? Keystone rollups is just another idea in a similar direction. So I think rollups in terms of functionality or sort of what sort of execution they offer is going to start to matter a lot.
Oh, there we go. One small thing to add, just that I think there's in terms of the proliferation of L2s, I think there's 2 topologies you have to think about. Up until today, we haven't had really good ways for users to move between chains, and that's what intents are really solving. And so that allows apps to have their own chains because you get users to those chains really easily. And then I think when you start to think about liquidity and how solvers are actually going to be able to support those flows, there's this second layer that solvers have to interact with, which is the sort of liquidity topology, right? How do you move assets between these chains? And so as that pressure increases on solvers to support all these chains, you're going to have huge improvements at that liquidity topology layer, where bridging assets sort of through canonical bridges that are sort of not at the intent layer, but really at the layer that requires full finalization. That liquidity topology is going to get way more interoperable, and then this liquidity problem becomes a lot smaller, right? Because you can move assets. You can move assets much more quickly between these chains at the solver layer and move low. Sorry. Cool. Yeah, I'm done.
I think that the real challenge is just figuring out how to abstract away liquidity and the user experience, because then applications can choose the chains that are most relevant to them. Every single chain is supposed to offer something unique to the applications that are onboarding to it, whether that's an app chain, if that's an app ecosystem. And all of these, the application should only have to worry about choosing the best chain for that specific use case, and then the liquidity and the user experience is essentially abstracted away. And that's what I think is important about the chain abstracted applications. And when you achieve that, then you get a lot more chains, because every single application or every single chain now has to compete less with other chains, because they can just get the applications that are best suited for it. And that way you won't get the concentration of liquidity and applications onto specific chains, but instead the proliferation. So I don't think there's a paradox. I actually think it just leads to way more chains than we see today. And that's not only just L2s, it's also alternative ecosystems or alternative VMs, where you have features that's not supported by the EVM, or you have access to other users. For example, Ton can integrate directly with Telegram, so you can onboard users through methods that we can't even dream of right now.
The way I generally think about it is, what's the pressure to launch your own chain or rollup? And there's a couple categories of it. One is trying to take the MEV. I think this is unfortunate, and I hope we get the world where this goes away. But today, that is what's causing most single sequence rollups. Then there's the feature sets of the chain, like what's the speed, UX properties you can get, and what you can get your validators to do. And I think that's going to keep continuing as a thing, because like fee markets mean you can't have one chain that does everything for the world. And then another one's just kind of the economic, like fee market side properties of it. Of you can make opinionated choices, like I don't want to charge transaction fees because this is for my app. Swap fees can count for this as my Sybil resistance, or maybe you have a KYC, so you're a real human. Every human gets $10 of fees, or things that are more Web 2, like every time you visit a website, you're costing them money, but in some amortized sense, but no one charges you for this. So I think these will keep continuing, and it's independent if liquidity has higher concentrations, because people will, if you have your own distribution, and you want more features, you might keep doing this. Another one's the dev UX of today we think of these VMs. Someday you'll want to write your standard Java, Rust, Go code and deploy that. There's no bottleneck there.
Nice. I would say pretty aligned between the panel there. So all of the dApps in the Ethereum ecosystem is mostly built using the old existing JSON RPC APIs. Do we need to start from the ground up and collectively agree to make the change there first? Or do we carry on building?
Please no. Please, can we keep them the same? Like, no.
Why do you say no?
I mean, I think JSON RPC is like well standardized, and like if you want to build a chain abstraction layer for like RPCs or something, this is like another layer. Like the nodes, we should not be pushing that complexity into the node ecosystem. Nodes worry about the chain, like nodes, when you're interacting with them, they should worry about the chain that they're responsible for. You shouldn't, like the JSON RPC layer to communicate with nodes should not include anything, you shouldn't be interacting with multiple chains at the same time through that layer. You should build like another layer of abstraction on top of that. And you could build APIs that are sort of meant to aggregate multiple JSON RPC endpoints, but like the goal is like not to add more complexity at that sort of lowest layer of, that layer closest to the node. I think that's like the wrong place to do it.
I was really ready to disagree with you in the first half, but I think you're absolutely right about like layering it. So I think that from a dApps perspective, this is not like, please can we stop surfacing sort of the compiled transaction execution plan to the users if they can understand it and get them to sign it, as if that's a safe thing to do. It's really not. But if we can solve that by layering on top of how to safely capture and like authorize a user intent, then definitely like we shouldn't be digging down further into the stack and reinventing stuff at that lower level. Like your point is that works, and let's not reinvent the whole wheel. Maybe some new rubber on the tire.
I think if you truly want to, you can not use the RPC today and just use your APIs. And we do that.
I mean, doesn't everyone just use Alchemy right now? Like, does anyone actually use the node RPCs unless you're trying to save costs?
I think everyone uses either one of them,
We actually use a mix of approaches. Like we use RPCs on Solana to land our transactions, but what we're doing for gas abstraction at the moment on EVM is going through Gelato as our root layer.
Oh, sorry. I thought we were talking about querying, not posting transactions.
Yeah.
I mean, if I can comment, I think the development experience doing cross-chain and all of these RPCs is actually quite bad right now. It sucks that there's not a one reliable way to do one RPC you enter into the application and then communicate with every single chain. So I do believe that needs to be like a reinvention of the wheel, but it shouldn't be on the low level. It should be on a high level where these providers, like Alchemy, provide a way where you can, in the query passing or transaction posting, actually provide the chain that you're interested in, so you don't have to rotate between all different chains and the RPCs that are associated with them. And this also makes it easier to build applications. Though then it becomes a problem where the RPCs don't support necessarily every chain. But I still believe that right now, you need to have like a series of different providers, especially if you want to support these edge chains that don't have a lot of volume. You begin mixing and matching different RPCs that have different properties. For example, Alchemy is pretty reliable, but a lot of other providers are, to be honest, not super reliable, especially on very small chains. It might also be a chain problem. So having one reliable way to interface with all of these chains where the assumptions are mostly similar would be a huge UX to the developer experience, huge UX improvement to the developer experience.
Maybe a hot take from us with Polaris is that getting all the data from all the EVM chains wasn't actually the problem like doing a balance query. The bigger problem is all the app standards of if you want to go find your Aave balance or like, show your portfolio everywhere, that's way harder because there's no app layer standards. And the chain one, it is annoying, but like it's also not that bad to go query Alchemy on 20 chains or Alchemy plus the other like 5 EVM data query backends. I guess running off ETH-JSON RPC does suck, but
I mean, that requires that Alchemy actually supports those chains. If you're new to a chain, like when Scroll initially launched, Alchemy wasn't there. So now you need to choose another provider, and they might not be as reliable or have the same performance as Alchemy. So now suddenly you need to build a huge infra around actually supporting all of these quirky features. Maybe like complicated retry loops to actually catch these, and you may even need to have a rotating list of RPC nodes to call because suddenly the other one is down. And this, I think, could be done a lot better.
I think so that I guess it also seems a bit fundamental if you're trying to support the tail end of a new chain. There's some indexing stack, and you have two worlds where the chain launches some indexing stack. They can make their own API or something that looks very similar. So, but the other world is that they post all the data to some common reference chain, like in Ethereum or some new lightweight thing, and you just index off that. But I don't really see a middle ground of there's some magic API layer that handles every new chain. Like someone's just aggregating, or you deal with bad RPCs.
I was hoping that would be ETH 3.0, honestly. Just like dump everything to ETH minute, 200 milliseconds, just index off ETH minute for all rollups, and you're good.
Yeah, and get it all ZKP'd so it's all authenticated for us.
I'm good without it as well, man, honestly.
Nice. So, slightly different topic. Polkadot and Cosmos, to some extent, can be described as one of the OGs within the chain abstraction narrative, as assets on parachains were interoperable with other parachains. What was the biggest hurdle preventing dApps deployed on these parachains from taking off, and why is it so different now?
It's not Solidity.
I would agree.
I mean, Solidity is by far the easiest. I think most developers in this room can just go home and almost build an application, while not secure, in a single day. And if you have to roll out Rust and do all of these other security assumptions, especially on the storage side, it's way more complicated than just building in Solidity, where you have really simple assumption around storage. Yeah, it's cheap to store a ton of shit, but at the end of the day, you can just easily do it. You don't have to worry about rent. You don't have to worry about crazy storage structures, and you can store almost an unlimited amount of storage. You don't have all of these features on all of these other chains, so the developer experience is significantly hampered. And that means just EVM is the best chain to build on, and the simplest.
Yeah, one other thing to add about, I'm not super familiar with the Polkadot stack, but the Cosmos stack, they sort of, the way they build their native bridging, everybody assumed in the Cosmos world that you were going to do, you were going to move liquidity around through the, by basically moving tokens through IBC. And what happens when you move tokens through IBC is like the token you get is route dependent. So if you move, depending on which change you actually move that token through, you end up with a different token. And so there's all this non-fungibility problems, which is like the whole reason Skip got built. And I think because people were sort of, you didn't have this intent layer, you just had this sort of, people were interacting directly with this like native interop low-level solution, that it created a lot of UX barriers to make like sort of chain abstracted UIs and applications harder to build.
That is true, but I'll also say we have the same non-fungibility in the EVM landscape that we just assume to be fungible. So like could have done the same thing there, but I think people are more honest in that landscape right now.
No, you can't really do it on Cosmos because different Cosmos chains have different assumptions about it because they're not L2s and they're not bridges. So you get the actual native validator security, and that means that if you have this crazy route where you're rewrapping a token, you're getting the lowest denominator, and we have seen chains.
Wait, this is far more secure than the 4-person multi-sigs on every. Wait, I'm not. This is fun. Of like the security assumption. Still the same routing problems. In Ethereum land, we're like, all our 4 multi-sigs are blessed, and they'll be stage 2 one day.
Wait, hold on. One thing to get clear though is like if you move tokens through any bridge from one rollup to another and then to another, once you have the tokens on the last rollup, the only chain you're trusting is that rollup, that final rollup. In Cosmos, if you do that, you're trusting every rollup along the path. And I think that's what creates like the complex like non-fungibility. Like you're trusting everyone along the path. So yeah. I think you're right that rollups are like definitely have trust assumptions. There's definitely issues there, but like the user knows which rollup they're trusting. They're trusting the canonical asset issued by that rollup that they're sitting on right now. They're not trusting like some other rollup that this token passed through.
So I guess my pushback there is I think the emergent architecture that happened in Cosmos was that everything became source chain routed, where you had this like packet forwarding middleware of like the equivalent is like imagine we're in the ZK rollup land, all block times are very fast, 1 second. Like you're on rollup 1, to get to rollup 2, you go to main like ETH, then back. I think that's the emergent architecture that was happening, which removed that point.
And it's also like just like Ethereum landscape sort of saying, oh, we'll just accept assets from Ethereum. So in Cosmos land, your security depends on the last, on the chain you sort of like got the asset from, right? On the EVM landscape, we just sort of like gave that status to Ethereum. So it's sort of like the same thing, right?
In my head, like one of the big failures in the Cosmos land is that we didn't prioritize UX flows that felt very native to Ethereum and Solana, like liquidity and users. Where like just it's a fact that Ethereum had and Solana have all the users and like liquidity there, and so you need user flows that feel like you're not migrating. Like it should still feel as native. And in my head, that's the strategic like kind of misstep that's trying to be corrected now.
Yeah, it's been quite fun being in like ETH land with like a foot in the Cosmos land and sort of like arbing the ideas over the last like 2-3 years, because definitely a lot of like ideas sort of like originated there, but sort of like were more relevant or like more pressing to apply in the Ethereum landscape. Like people have been talking about like stake centralization and all of those issues like forever, but they only became relevant when ETH had like Binance controlling 33%. Only then it became like a big enough problem to sort of like take that research and apply it.
Go on, I'll let you finish.
Oh, I think one of the problems that happened was making all of this relevant to the users. Like having users need to know any of this in order to trust is like a misstep. I think like chain abstracted apps, our goal is to make that not a thing that people need to know about.
So we have just about 90 seconds left. So a question for yourself, Peter, and Jed in particular. What aspects of the stack is it important for a chain abstracted app to own? And when does it make sense to outsource and why?
The way we're looking at it at the moment is application first and infra second. That's just our approach to it. Because like, we obviously met your team and said like we can get to the market really, really quickly. And it's a very, very simple product for the end user, but it's horribly complex underneath the hood. And that's actually quite hard to explain to people generally. So I think user feedback, number one, is the biggest. I think when we start to more get into the infra, it's more around RFQs, RFS, where we're looking for best execution and the best chain to do that execution. Like we were looking at like the teams looking at intent and solver space and trying to look to see like where we felt we best fit, and also where the market's going. We talked about kind of like the consolidation of, let's say, major execution, and we know like major market makers already have intent arms, and they're looking at how they can do off-chain fills. So first is getting like the feedback from the market of what they want to see, how we can kind of tell the story of the application, how we can onboard users as well, being sort of not tied to a single chain. We're more like a SEX than we are a DEX. We're not to a single ecosystem. So I think there's lots of learnings in terms of what people want to see, how people interact with it, and also how we acquire users and pull them away from the Binances, from the Bybits. That's kind of the end game, obviously, for applications like this, right? But yeah, for application first, and then infra second, but mostly around the trading aspect or the settlement aspect of the product.
Yeah, I think the way we look at this, there are really sort of two centers of gravity that we need to negotiate between. And on one hand, like, yeah, it's very much just what is the user trying to do and how easy or how much can you make the way that they do that. So the most likely action is also the correct one. On the other side of that, you've got like trust and security. And so these sort of exist in tension because by compromising on trust or security or self-custodial architecture, then you can make things very, very easy. And like, look at all the Telegram bots out there. Whereas if you really go hard into sort of user self-custody principles, decentralization, censorship resilience, like you cannot not compromise how easy it is for people to understand that. You sort of bleed out through the abstraction. So yeah, I think negotiating those two is the current main challenge of the space if we want to bring more users whilst also like adhering to the principles that we've got, and otherwise everyone's just going to keep using Binance. So negotiating those two is kind of the start, and then the answer to your question is like, how deep do we need to go in order to do that? Like we touch what the user sees, we touch education as the first step, but then we also touch how do we translate the action they performed, how do we capture a signature, how do we execute that transaction, how do you make sort of that predictable but also trusted, and then you go as deep as you need to, really, to pull that off. And I think how deep that is will change over time as better abstractions emerge.
Nice. That's a wrap. Thank you very much for taking part, guys. And feel free to chat with us after.
Thank you.